The expenditure method. It focuses on goods and services produced within the country during 1 year. GDP equals C plus I plus X plus G minus M. The market value of goods and services are different from the earnings of the factor production. Net domestic product is the value of the output of the economy. Good morning and welcome to the third session in terms of the business decision theories in Unit 2, where we are going to talk about the methods of measurements of GDP. Now, moving further, there are three different methods to measure the GDP. We are going to start with the product method, the income method, and the expenditure method. Now, GDP, as I have told you, it is a quantitative figure. So you cannot understand GDP just by a theory and saying that the GDP will have a value. What people question when it comes to GDP is that how is the value determined? When you say that a GDP will grow by 10, 11, 12%, then automatically this is the way how you need to calculate it. So we have some standard methods called as the product method, we have the income method, and the expenditure method. But now we are going to go one by one to understand what are these methods all about. So these are the three methods. We are starting with the product method. In the product method, the value of all goods services produced in different industries during the year is added up. A very simple concept. What I mean by this product method is that I'm just going to add up the value of all the goods produced by the industries in that particular year. Now, why am I doing that? Because I'll just go a step back where I'm trying to talk about national product equals to national income, which is equal to national expenditure. So whatever that is being produced in our country at that time in that given year is going to be directly to our income, which is equal to the expenditure part. So this is going to be quite critical for all of us to understand in terms of the total value. So this is very, very important altogether. We need to understand, we need to go through it, and we need to analyze the entire factor. So I'm definitely going to go with this factor saying that national product is equal to the national income, which is equal to the national expenditure altogether. So very, very important for all of us to understand and take it forward. Now, the other thing that we are looking into it is that now, there are different factors altogether which comes into this picture. Why? Because if you look at the industrial segment in India, there are different industries which are located in different forms, in different formats. For example, let me talk about retail, or we talk about chemicals, or we talk about FMCG. All this will have a different kind of output. They don't produce the same kind of output. What they typically tend to do is that they try to produce an output based on the necessity, on the requirement altogether. So not all the industries will have the same kind of functionality altogether. So, but then whenever we go by this product method, what we simply try to do is that we add up all the product output, that's the value of goods that has been produced, and we just calculate the GDP. Now, the next thing is that this is also known as the value added method in terms of GDP at factor cost. But the following items are included in India. One, we are talking about the agriculture. Next, we are talking about the allied services, mining, manufacturing, construction, electricity, gas, water supply, transport, communication, trade, banking, insurance, even real estate coming into picture, ownership of dwellings, business services, public and thing. In other words, some of the gross value added. Now, if you just look into the slide, you will be able to see that I have been able to add up the whole lot of things that has been produced in the Indian economy. So probably we are starting from agriculture and we are going till government services. So we are probably trying to add up each and every sector that is possible in India. No doubt about it, because that is how we are trying to estimate ourselves. That's how we are trying to go further in this entire activity. Now, what is that we need to understand, or what is that we need to go ahead and try to go forward about it is that Now, if you see here, in other words, I'm just trying to put it as the gross value added, which means to say that the sum total, that's it. I'm not coming into the net calculation here. I do not know the exact value. I'm just going to put a gross value. So sum total of all these sectors that we have been speaking about here, starting from transport, communication, or probably banking, insurance, real estate, every single sector's output, I'm just adding it up so that we are going to get a final value. So this is going to be quite interesting for all of us to know all about. So this is very, very important for us to understand. Next, we are going to talk about the income method. Now, income in India is a very, very sensitive word, I would like to say. Why? Because none of us would like to actually disclose the actual income. Now, when it comes to that question of what exactly are you earning, how much exactly are you earning, we don't want to answer this question. That question always remains a hidden part. But nevertheless, coming back to the income method in India, when we try to calculate for the country, we are going to say the people of the country who produce GDP during the year receive income for their work. Yeah, that is quite true. So whatever kind of work, the nature of work that you are involved with, you will get something in return called as salary. So you are not going to go back and you're not going to say that this is the only way of producing, but rather you are going to use this as a part of your salary. So now what you're going to do is that thus the GDP by income method is the sum of all factor incomes. That's very, very important. So wages and salaries, rent, interest, profit, all those factors are going to be added here. Now, why I'm using this income method? Quite interesting. Let's try to understand it. Let's try to first go by the factors here. When I talk about income, income can be in many formats. That's what we have to understand here. A person in India can have multiple sources of income. He might be working part-time, he might be working full-time, he might have other sources of business. So now what happened is that I am trying to go by the factors, some factor of all income. So what are all the incomes am I earning? So I might be doing a business, I might be doing a part-time, I might be trying to come with some other forms of income. So I'm going to add everything. So if I look here, the rent, profit and interest, even those are income. I'm including all those passive factors here. I'm not going to leave even the passive factors. I'm going to take all the passive and active income. This is where our country's income method becomes a complicated one to calculate. Let me just explain you why. Because many of us do not want to reveal the exact income. We only go by that one income that we do on an active basis. For example, if I'm working in an IT company, I would just like to disclose that IT company income because that's a regular kind of work which I'm doing, for which there will be a TDS, for which the company will deduct some tax as in terms of my income. But then as working in IT company, I might also have a side business. I might also have a side work factor which I'm trying to do, but that is not going to be revealed by me. So that is where this becomes a challenge. This becomes a very big question mark. People ask me this as where am I going to count on the rent, income and profit factor? So somewhere these things have to be included. These things have to be added upon to say that yes, these are also the factor of income. So that's why in the income methodology, we say that we're going to sum total all the income, put it together, and then we will be able to get an answer. Moving further, the expenditure method. Look at the name itself, the expenditure method. It focuses on goods and services produced within the country during 1 year. Definitely, yes. Do I mean by expenditure just the spending factor? No, what I try to say here is that it focuses on the goods that are going to be produced within the country that 1 year. Why am I getting into it here is that consumer expenditure on services and durable and non-durable. So I'm using FMCG goods both in terms of the durability and the non-durability factor. Investment in fixed capital such as residential, non-residential building, machineries, inventories, all those factors. So what is happening here is that I am trying to put it in a way where I'm trying to look at from an expenditure standpoint. I'm not just looking from human income. If you look here, every year, month on month, week on week, year on year basis, what happens is that the consumer is spending some money on services, on that is going to be for his personal services, that's going to be for his house, for his people, for all these surroundings. So there is going to be some sort of money that is going to be invested in. Now, followed with that investment, it comes in with a fixed capital such as a residual income factor, a non-residential building. So there is some kind of expenses which is made on inventory, on purchases, on machineries and other factors. So all these things put together will definitely constitute the expenditure method. So that's how this expenditure method comes into picture. Now, moving further, let's talk about the calculation here. Now, when we talk about the calculation, government expenditure on final goods and services, that I'm going to take it as G, export of goods and services for the country, that is about X. Now, less the imports, M, and this is going to be the part of the consumption through which how we are going to calculate the GDP. So, how is the GDP calculated? Let me just write down the formula for you. GDP equals C plus I plus X plus G minus M. So now let me put it this way. Now consumption plus income plus the exports, government income all put together minus the imports coming into picture. So that is where GDP is going to be calculated. My most important thing which I want to rely back on here is that I'm going to say that exports minus imports, that is what is looked upon in terms of calculation of GDP. So we have the C factor that's going to be talked about, the consumption, the income, the exports, the government factor that's coming, government expenditure that's coming into picture, minus the exports. So, I mean, minus the imports, which is going to be counted in terms of your GDP value. So, please remember this formula, C plus I plus X plus G minus M. So, that's what will lead you to calculate in terms of your GDP value. This is very, very important. Why? Because tomorrow, when you see a GDP figure in your newspaper, in your articles, wherever you are seeing it, there would be a question that would be asked in terms of how have you done it, how the GDP is arrived at, and this is the answer for it. So this is how you will be able to calculate and do it. Moving further, similarly, any imported component such as raw materials which is used in the manufacture of export goods is also excluded. So let's exclude all those parts. What we will try to do here is that we will try to understand this GDP by expenditure method at the market prices, which is going to give me C plus I plus G plus X minus M. Typical formula, please understand here, where X minus M is my net export. Now, this is very important. Why I'm coming here, which is either to be positive or negative, is that when I talk about the export minus imports, India is a country which is trying to focus more on exports rather than imports. Why? Because exports will directly give you income and imports will lead to expenditure. So when you are trying to calculate this exports minus imports, you need to come to the net export. This is only a gross value. When I just say a value called as X, I'm just trying to talk about the gross exports. But how am I going to arrive at the net exports? Which means I need to subtract from the exports, I need to subtract the imports. So X minus M is going to give me the value which could be either positive or which could be negative. So this is very, very important for us to know. So if India stands on the positive side, that means we are gaining income because the exports are rising. If it comes on the negative side, that means we are incurring expenditure because we are still not able to go up and reach the benchmark. So that's where this is very, very important for us to understand. The next thing which I would always say is that when you look for the export and import factor, one crucial thing here is that every export will have to calculate on the expenditure basis. Why? Because when you're looking, the factors have to be included. How much are you putting in terms of the realization value? How much has gone in terms of particular goods or particular manufacturing sector? How much have we included in terms of the factors? All those things have to be calculated with the government expenditure coming into picture. factor, and then we will be able to calculate the net export. Now, moving further, GDP at factor cost. So when I say factor cost, it's the sum of net value added by all the producers within the country. Sum of total net value, that is the net value added by all the producers. Since the net value added gets distributed as income by the owners of the production, GDP is a sum of the domestic factor alone. So what I would say is that net value added plus depreciation. So what is this net value? Why is that we are so concerned with the net value added? Now, for example, you are going to manufacture a car. For manufacturing a car, there are so many components that needs to be added. It might be steel, it might be iron, it might be plastic or fiber. So many components that are going to be added into the car. So the net value added will get distributed, which means to say sum of all the net value. Now let's understand that each and every component is going to add to the final value of the car. So sum of all net value added by all producers. Now, the car is not going to be manufactured only by the car company. There are a lot of people who will join hands with the company to manufacture. So that will get distributed as income, because several people who supply materials will also generate income from this process. So GDP will be nothing but a domestic factor altogether. Net value added plus the depreciation. We have included all those factors, and then we will be able to come at GDP in the factor cost position altogether. So when I say that word factor cost, that means it's already realized. It is something which is included. So every factor that is going to be added for the manufacturing, for the final product altogether, all those things are a part of this system. They're all a part of this entire manufacturing thing, and that's how the value is going to be calculated. So you will not be able to find out a single value, a single unit kind of thing. This is going to be at the rate, so you are going to calculate it altogether. Now, followed by GDP at factor cost also includes compensation of the employees, definitely, which includes wages and salaries. Now, operating surplus, which is the business profit of both the incorporated and unincorporated firms. We also talk about gross value added at factor cost, compensation of the employees, depreciation, mixed income of the self-employed. So when you look into it, you will be able to understand there are several factors that are included. It is not just one value. It's going to be something where you will be able to see that these are all continuously added. These are all continuously put in terms of the factor cost. So what happens is that the compensation of the employee, the wages, the salaries, the operating surplus, all those factors will get added one by one in terms of the factors, and they all put together. So when you talk about the operating surplus itself, the use of the word of surplus, why? Because this is the extra when we are talking about gross value added at factor cost. So what is that? Input cost minus compensation. Why? Because salaries is an expense. So you have to subtract that compensation that is being given to the employees and the depreciation, because depreciation is the wear and tear value. So even those things have to get subtracted. Finally, you will get the GDP at factor cost. So this is what is very, very important for us in terms of understanding when you are going to calculate GDP at the factor cost value. Now, moving further, conceptually, GDP at factor cost and GDP at market cost must be identical. Conceptually, it is not true 100%. Conceptually, we believe that this is because factor cost, that is payments to the factor of producing goods, must equal to the final value of the goods. Fair enough. That's what we want to understand. But however, the market value of goods and services are different from the earnings of the factor production. So what happens here is that theoretically, when we try to make you understand that yes, the factor cost and the market price are same. Why? Because what you are putting in is what you are going to give out. So the input must match the output value. But in reality, what happens is that the price at which the good is going to be sold in the market will not be the same. It will vary automatically. Now, the cost of manufacturing a Hyundai Alcazar might be different than what price it is going to be sold to you. So moment you look into the variations of the car, starting from the base model of the car to the top end of that, there is a variation in price. There is a variation at the market value altogether. So what we try to understand here is that the input cost might not be true every time. It will vary automatically. So that's what we are trying to talk about from the factors of production here, followed by in GDP. At a market price are included as indirect tax, and they are excluded subsidies by the government. Therefore, in order to arrive at GDP at factor cost, what we try to do here is that we try to do a very, very simple exercise. Let us try to understand that simple exercise here. What we typically tend to do is that we take the GDP at factor cost, indirect taxes are subtracted. So we take GDP at factor cost. So let's take it here, GDP at factor cost minus the indirect taxes. So let me just put it across, indirect taxes, subsidies are added back to GDP at market price. So now what happens is that now the subsidies will be added to GDP at the market price altogether. So when you see this, when you put it across and you see this, what will happen is that GDP at market price minus indirect taxes plus the prices. So when you want to arrive this, let me rewrite the equation here as I have written it. GDP market price, this is taken into picture, minus indirect taxes plus these subsidies. This is very, very important. So when you are arriving at factor cost, please understand the indirect tax alone gets removed, subsidies will be added back. That is very, very important for you to understand the formula. Now, the next thing is the NDP, the net domestic product. Net domestic product is the value of the output of the economy during the year. Let's understand that value of the net output of the economy. So very, very clear for all of us. This is what we mean by saying the value of the output of the economy. Some of the country's capital equipments wear and tear out because of the obsolete value that has been going out and during the production process. The value of this capital consumption is some percentage of the gross investment which is deducted from the GDP. So coming to the formula, net domestic product is GDP factor cost minus depreciation. So when I write down this formula, NDP equals GDP at factor cost minus the depreciation factor. Why we are removing the depreciation? Because we feel that that value becomes obsolete. The unit value of that machinery or all those factors that has been taken into account, that will get obsolete because of the usage factor. So over a period of time, we subtract the depreciation, we calculate the net domestic product GDP at factor cost minus the depreciation value. So this will help you to find out what is the net domestic value. So when people say, sir, this is the net domestic value, how do you arrive at it? This is how you will be able to arrive at it. Now, moving further, nominal and real GDP. Now, this is going to be another interesting factor for all of us. Why? Because you are going to ask this question at least 10 times before answering. What is nominal? What is real? Why? Because when we talk about GDP, is it first of all real, or is somebody giving a forecasted figure to me? Why is that GDP being divided into so many clusters? Let us try to understand. When GDP is measured on the basis of current price, what is prevailing right now, it is called as GDP at current prices or nominal GDP. So what is the factor? When you are trying to measure that GDP at the current price prevailing. Now, when the price is going on in the market, you are going to measure the GDP. I'm going to call it as the nominal GDP. Now, on the other hand, when GDP is calculated on the basis of fixed price in some year, now you're going to take some fixed price year, we call it as GDP at constant prices or real GDP. So what I'm trying to do on fixed prices of some year, let me take the fixed price of the year 2019 or 20 and then start calculating it all together. Then what will happen? We call it as the real GDP. That is what we mean by a real GDP value. So you will be able to see that that's a real GDP calculation. Why? Because I am taking a fixed price of some year, and I'm just doing it. So one side, the nominal GDP versus real GDP question exactly comes into picture. Nominal GDP is the value of goods and services produced in a year and measured in terms of rupees at the current market price. So this is what we are. So whatever you see on the papers, when people say that at the market, this is what the GDP is expected, they are calculating at the current price. They are not calculating it at some fixed price or some value. They are calculating it at the current price, at the current market value, and saying that this is what is happening altogether. Now, in comparison one year with another, we faced with the problem that the rupee is not stable measure of purchasing power. Now, this is another challenge for us. Rupee does not seem to remain stable, which we know that. Why? Because every time, every moment, the rupee keeps to fluctuate between that dollar and the other currencies altogether. So, GDP may rise great deal in a year, not because the economy has been growing, but because of the rise in prices, the inflation or the prices in terms of the factors. Now, there might be an inflation or rise in prices again and again factor. Why? Because we are trying to talk about it is that today you are experiencing in the pandemic situation a rise in prices. So you might feel that there is a sudden rise in the economy, sudden push up happening. That is primarily happening. Why? Because the cost of the inputs are going up and the production prices, the production factors are going up. That's why you find a rise in the price factor. Now, on the contrary, a GDP may increase as a result in fall in prices in a year, but actually it is compared to the last year. In both the 5 cases, in all those factors, when we talk about GDP only will show the real value altogether. To rectify the estimation of GDP, when we are trying to talk about, we need a measure that adjusted the falling prices. So we always need to have a method that can help us to adjust the price and calculate the GDP at any given point of time. Now, nominal and real GDP, we also try to do the measuring of GDP at constant prices, what we call it as the real GDP. So let me take a constant price. Let me keep 2020 as a base or 2018 as a base. Let me keep this constant price. To calculate the real GDP, the base year is chosen when the general price is normal. So let us go with 2018. There was not a pandemic at that point of time. So let us keep the general prices normal at that. It is neither high nor too low. So this has been a standard year for us. That's how we set it. The prices are set to 100 to 1 for that base year. And then we start calculating the real GDP. Now, the general price level of the year for which the real GDP is to be calculated is related to the base year. So we will relate it to 2018 on the basis of the following formula. Now, they have taken 1991 as the base year, 1999 to 2000 is 6 lakhs crores. That's what we were seeing. And to the current year is 300. So the real GDP for the year 1999-2000, how it's calculated, this 6 lakhs crores into 100 divided by 300, there we get it as 2 lakh crores. A very, very simple calculation, keeping it at the base year for which we are going to multiply it into 100 to the current value, and then we are able to calculate the real GDP value. Now, the GDP deflator, what do you mean by the word deflator? Deflator is an index of price changes of goods and services that are included in the GDP. So this is very, very important. It's an index of price. It's a collection. Index is a movement that you're going to see. So it's a price index which is calculated by dividing the nominal GDP given by the real GDP. So nominal GDP. So let's take that value, nominal GDP, divided by the real GDP factor at the same year and multiplying it by 100. So when you multiply this by 100, you will get the values here. So for example, again it is being shown here, 1993 GDP in 1997 98 has increased by 135.9% due to the inflation in prices. So from 1049.2 crores, that's what we have been talking about, it has moved up to 1426.7 crores. That is 1426.7 crores in 97-98. So you can see the rise in price that has been happening. With this, I come to the end of this particular session. I hope and believe that all the information that has been shared through this session will be of a great value and resource to you. In the upcoming sessions, we will be seeing some more factors of the national income. Until then, stay tuned, stay blessed, and stay enlightened forever. Thank you once again for joining me today on this wonderful session.